Hello and welcome to this online learning session about understanding the future users of the high street, hosted by me, Joe Barrett, the co-founder of the Teenage Market. So as I've said, I'm the co-founder of the Teenage Market. The Teenage Market is an event that I started in 2012 with my younger brother, Tom. It was all about trying to engage young people and bring young people to our town centre's marketplace. I'll talk a little bit more about the initiative a little bit later on. I'm also a board member of the government's High Streets Task Force and a junior fellow at the Institute of Place Management. And the aims of the session today, hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to define and describe younger people's needs in relation to the high street, both now and in the future, be able to demonstrate an appreciation of engaging younger people in decision making and delivery in order to revitalise and transform your high street, and also be provided with some examples of good practice and case studies, which will hopefully help you formulate solutions to specific local problems concerning the engagement of young people in high street revitalisation and change. So what do we mean when we talk about young people? Because it can be quite a generalised term. Well, in the context of generations, young people are split across three quite separate generational types. The one that you may be most familiar with is the millennial generation. They represent 21% of the population. I myself am a millennial, and they're aged between 25 and 40 years old. You've then got Generation Z, or the Zoomer generation, which represents 19% of the population, and they're young people aged between 9 and 24. And then we've got a new generation, Generation Alpha, and they're young people all the way to those that have just been born up to the age of 8 years old, and they represent 8% of the population. In terms of the characteristics then of each of these generations, it can be hard to sort of specifically pick out individual characteristics, but studies have shown that millennials, for example, are tech savvy. We may not have been born with iPads and iPhones in our hands, but we certainly know how to use them. With job hoppers, it's probably unlikely that we'll stay in a career for the entirety of our lives, and we'll probably move around in terms of our jobs throughout our careers. We're civic orientated, so we've got that sense of community, wanting to give back. Having grown up in the context of the 2008 financial crash, we're quite entrepreneurial, wanting to start our own businesses. And interestingly, we're also quite family centric. A lot of young people, a lot of millennials have grown up for a large point of their lives growing up with their families. And so, a very kind of family centric in that regard. In terms of Zoomers, Zoomers are digital natives. So they have literally grown up with the iPads and the iPhones in their hands. They're driven by, core values as well. So you can see from this picture on a climate protest that, they're specifically and explicitly climate conscious, a lot of Zoomers, and, motivated by personalities such as Greta Thunberg. Probably in part because of growing up, both having to pay, whether that's tuition fees or, seeing the impact of the financial crash, are also cautious with money. And they're also incredibly creative and expressive as a generation, more so perhaps than the millennial generation that preceded them. Now, again, alphas, it's difficult to be able to say because they again are so young. But what we do know is that they're going to be the most educated generation that there's been. They're going to be artificial intelligence adopters. So AI will be a key core part of their lives. While millennials, we talked about them being job hoppers, studies show and academics believe that alphas are quite likely to be mobile as well in terms of their job, but they could also be global in terms of seeking out opportunities. Having grown up with the iPad, they are visual learners, so they're used to seeing things in a visual way, and are most likely will have that throughout their careers. And some have even speculated that they could be perhaps one of the most impatient or selfish generations, based on the fact that they're used to having everything given to them at a moment's notice and being able to access information at a touch of a button. So that's interesting when we think of how that may shape them, the alphas, in terms of their characteristics as consumers, especially on the high street, as they grow older. So we approach this idea that, young people are killing the high street. It's something that, we sometimes see in some contexts that, young people are to blame for some of the woes that we're currently seeing on the high street. And so how true ultimately is that claim? Well, in terms of online retail, again, online retail is considered to have massively hit the high street over the last few years, especially. And as this graph here from the ONS shows, online retail sales as a percentage of total retail sales have steadily increased over the last number of years. So over the last decade, you can see it increasing there and peaking around Christmas time. The pandemic has accelerated online retail hugely, as you can see from that spike around 2020. And, we've kind of now gone up and down and stabilized around the 30% mark. And in terms of young people's contribution to this, well, a survey by the online marketplace OnBuy found that 53% of young people aged between 25 and 34 prefer to seek out details online rather than talk to store staff when they're in a shop. And again, 61% of millennials say that they find it easier to chat to a retailer digitally through channels such as online chat, as opposed to visiting a physical location. So it is quite clear that, millennials especially, those older young people prefer to shop online than they do perhaps going into a physical store. But there is a big but here. And that but is the fact that the Zoomer generation could turn out to be the unexpected saviors of the high street, because while the millennials are less likely to do their research on purchasing in store, Gen Z are much more likely to do so. When they were surveyed in this rather large study, it actually found that they are the most likely to say that going to the shops is an enjoyable experience. And those that were age 55 and older were actually the least likely to say that of all the different age groups. They were also likely, the Zoomers, to say that shopping on the high street with friends and family is considered to be a special time. So this, idea, this concept that, young people are killing the high street, I don't think really turns out to be true at all. And I think what's more important is to consider how we can best engage and attract young people to our high streets and town centres, because they obviously enjoy that experience. And what this all underlines is the fact that our high streets and town centres are moving towards a point where the experience is absolutely everything. And I think a great example of that is the House of Vans in London. It's a permanent venue opened by the footwear and apparel brand Vans within the 150-year-old brick arches at Waterloo Station in London. And they want to promote and encourage creative expression. The House of Vans has been described as a physical manifestation of the culture and the creativity at the heart of the Vans brand. And it combines, as you can see from these pictures, skateboarding, art, film, music together to create a truly unique and interactive space. So as I said, it includes an art gallery, a cinema, live music, and since opening in 2014, the space has hosted over 500 free skate sessions. And as you can see from this picture here, ran a girls only skate night in celebration of International Women's Day. And I think it's a really great example of how that line between retail and activity is being blurred in order to sort of deliver that brand experience that's more than just about purchasing a physical product. And I think that is the future of our high streets and town centres in many, many ways. And what's also interesting is the fact that the report by the Institute of Place Management, the High Street 2030 Achieving Change report, went and spoke to a number of our teenage market traders and customers in Bolton. And what they found was that, the older interviewees, they expressed more nostalgic views about the high street. And there was a sense that they'd lost something, that's, something had escaped them. Whereas young people expressed, positivity, hopefulness, and support for the renovations that were underway in Bolton. So again, I don't think that this concept that, young people are not interested in the high street really rings true. It is the case that young people feel like there is something there to offer them. And I think it's up to people involved in shaping our high streets and town centres to make sure that it's the most attractive place that it can possibly be. What I think is really worth drilling down into in terms of just some of the data is how this tale of towns versus cities has emerged over the last number of years, especially. And if we look back, the last 20 or so years, what we see is that the number of residents aged 20 to 29 living in cities has nearly tripled. And so this group now makes up almost half, 49%, of the total population of large city centres. And the reason why this is the case is quite simply because of the availability of jobs. Young people are attracted to cities because the jobs are there for them. But it's not all great, as you can see from this little person on the right, who represents the city centre resident. They like the proximity of restaurants, leisure and culture, the availability of public transport, being close to work. But what they don't like is the cost of housing. They don't like the pollution that's surrounded them, and the fact that they live quite far away from, I suppose, rural areas. And so at the same time, we've seen city centres get younger, as we can see from that graph on the right. This research from the Centre of Towns shows that our villages, our communities, our smaller towns have all been getting progressively older, and that gap has been widening between cities and our smaller towns. And the Centre for Towns have basically demonstrated that since 1981, Britain's towns and villages have lost more than 1 million people aged under 25, while gaining more than 2 million over 65s. And so this presents issues and problems and challenges for our towns, especially around our labour markets, which are becoming much less dynamic because we have a growing elderly population putting strain on health and social care. And it's a particular problem for a coastal town. Blackpool has the oldest population of any UK town, followed by coastal towns of Worthing, Bournemouth and Southend. And with 4 in 10 coastal communities in England potentially seeing a decline in the number of residents aged under 30, so our young people, by the year of 2039, it's not just the case that we, or these communities, have to think, how do we attract young people through our high streets and the offer that's on our high streets and our town centres, but how do you retain young people? How do you stop that outflow of young people going to chase the bright lights of the big cities? And action needs to be taken, put very quite simply. And the issue here is the fact that movers, those people that move, will on average earn more, 33% more than those that stay. And this report by the Social Mobility Commission has said that COVID-19 presents an opportunity to potentially transform that internal migration by allowing more young people, especially, to stay where they grew up and work at home. And you can see from this quote here from Sandra Wallace, the Joint Interim Chair of the Social Mobility Commission, who basically says in a nutshell that people should not have to move to prosper. And it's something that I care very strongly about. And I think that the impact of the pandemic, which we'll explore in a second, really does underline the fact that, moving forward, we have an opportunity in order to provide an offer which attracts and retains young people in our town centres. So in terms of the impact of COVID-19 on young people, we couldn't do this presentation, this learning session, without ultimately understanding and analysing the impact that the coronavirus pandemic has had, because it has been profound. So there's been a big rise in redundancies among young people. So the number of young people out of work in the UK, those aged 25 to 34, have faced the biggest risk of losing their jobs. So the redundancy rate between September and November of 2020 was 16.2 per 1,000, which is a 5 times increase on the period a year earlier. And obviously what this means is that, millennials especially have lost income because of the pandemic. So more than 100,000 people in 50 countries were asked about how the pandemic has affected their lives. And it showed that 56% have seen their incomes reduced. Millennials were the hardest hit group, 68%, followed by the Zoomer generation. So what is the impact of this like? Well, this is the example of Abigail, who's 27. She was a store manager working there for 5 years at J. Crew, and she wants to stay in bricks and mortar retailing because she's got a passion for it. And she talks here about how she's sent off a number of job applications in the last 6 months, and the majority of which she just never hears from. Whereas in the past, it was quite easy to get a job because of the amount of closures. It's been a very, very difficult process for her. And so, as well as redundancies and the impact that that's having, we've got surging house prices in the UK, making it difficult for young people to become homeowners. According to Rightmove, the average asking price has increased in the last month by nearly over £5,500 to reach £330,000. And prices have been rapidly increasing in areas such as Wales and northwest England in particular. So it's no surprise then when we consider all this that the pandemic has taken a devastating toll on young people's mental well-being. That's according to the Princess Trust, who found that 1 in 4 young people feel like they've been unable to cope with life since the start of the pandemic. And that rises to 40% for those that aren't in work, education, or training. Further research has shown that 1.5 million children under 18 will either need new or additional mental health support. And findings that follow data published by NHS Digital last October that show a 50% rise in mental health disorders among young people. So we have a crisis here. It's a crisis, it's a housing crisis, but also a crisis of mental health that young people are being impacted by. And our high streets and town centres, in terms of providing better mental well-being, ultimately hold the solution in terms of being able to help support young people through this difficult time for them. As well as from a mental health point of view, if we think from an environmental health point of view, the World Health Organization, has done research and found that more than 90% of the world's children breathe toxic air every day. You can see the graph there, which looks at the London background average and the annual legal limit in grey, which has exceeded twice. But then the World Health Organization recommendation is also regularly exceeded there as well. And on a global level, more than 1 in every 4 deaths of children under 5 years of age is directly or indirectly related to environmental risks. And there is a link here between the environment and mental health. So very recent research, which has been conducted by King's College, found that there's a link between air pollution and the risk of developing mental illnesses like depression and anxiety in young people. And it was a 25-year study of young adults living in the UK, and it found that those who had been exposed to greater levels of pollution had more chance of developing those mental illness by the time they'd reached 18. So again, if we're thinking about our high streets and town centres in terms of being able to really try and solve these problems and address them, we have to be looking at creating green and open spaces within them in order to try and make sure that we don't have a crisis of mental health in this country. So because of all of these factors, what we're actually now seeing is a millennial generation especially moving away from the cities and to our smaller towns. So there is almost a reversal happening right now of the trend that we've seen over the last 20 to 25 years. And part of that has been because of the likelihood of home working being here to stay. We've all seen over the last year or so a move towards home working, of Zoom meetings. And when firms were recently surveyed, 74% plan on maintaining the increase in home working that's occurred. 9 in 10 workers actually said that they'd like to continue that in some form. And when you have also reports that show that the majority of people working from home are as productive, if not more, it's quite straightforward in terms of how you think that this is here to stay. We are as productive, if not more. People want it. It's likely, in terms of both from an employer and employee's point of view, it's a likely feature of our working environment for many years to come. And what we're also seeing is that students, so that the Zoomer generation, are looking to choose local universities much more so than they did previously. And so this evidence has been, for example, the University of Cumbria has seen a 10.5% in inquiries. And if we look at the head of insight at UCAS, who's saying, Sarah Barr is saying that traditionally we had a boarding school system of higher education where you didn't consider your local university, but now, a lot more are wanting to stay local. So all in all, is this a massive opportunity for towns? And I believe that it absolutely is. But in terms of how we address that, how you make the most of that, that is the key question. And I think one of those features that I think is going to be much needed and required is rise of co-working spaces. I don't think it's going to be the case where young people, want to stay working for the majority of their week on their own. They like the idea of socializing, of connecting with other people, potentially who could help them out in their own field, in their own industry. And so co-working spaces are going to be a really important feature of many high streets of the future. And a case study that I wanted to reference was Three Spaces International House in Brixton. And International House is effectively London's largest affordable workspace. And it's spread, as you can see there, over 12 stories. And it provides a home for entrepreneurs and locals as it's facilitated by their innovative buy, give, work model. And that is a very innovative concept, a simple concept where space is given away when space is bought. So rent from those buying spaces goes towards providing space for social enterprises and initiatives which promote diversity, inclusiveness, and innovation, and to supporting those who are at the first stages of their business journey and perhaps can't afford to pay for workspace as they're starting out. And so there are various give hubs, and they're spread over 5 floors, and they include space for community events, youth entrepreneurship, community initiatives, a textiles workshop, and a centre for photography services. As you can see from this floor, there's a project space, which is for projects to give, for give floor tenants, as well as an accelerator program. You've got an event space free of charge, and you've got a goods yard for bike parking, an entrance for the co-working space as well. On one of the floors, you have a youth innovation hub, and on there are dedicated desks and offices for youth-focused organizations and young people who are looking to scale their business ideas. You've got a music studio, DJ workshops, and sound production. So all in all, there's opportunities for young people to be able to engage with. On another floor, you have a number of community initiatives working alongside each other. And so you've got nonprofits, local charities, social enterprises. And, in this project, organizations have to be based locally, or they have to deliver programs which directly benefit local residents. And there are 37 organizations using the floor, so they can have the opportunity to collaborate and cooperate with one another. And on the very top floors, you've got social and co-working spaces. And that's an opportunity for those that are part of the give floors and part of the buy floors to come together and to be able to meet each other in a kind of social setting. So I think that's a really good model. We think of all the vacant commercial space that there may be in high streets and town centres over the next number of years. That is potentially a really good model to look towards. And so another feature, as we talked about the housing crisis that we're currently facing, those towns that really embrace the need to deliver affordable housing, I think will see benefits that come from attracting young people to them. Similarly, if you have green space in your town centre, we talked about the fact that, it's not just a case of, it would be a nice thing to have. We're talking about pollution that's potentially affecting mental health. So the importance of being able to provide green space, like I say, not just for the physical well-being, but also for the well-being, the mental well-being of young people is absolutely essential. They need to have good public transport so that young people can get around affordably, efficiently, is really important. They need to provide good culture and entertainment, having live music venues, places for them to be able to socialize is absolutely key, and a nice number of interesting bars and restaurants. And quite key to that is the rise of street food events. So I myself am involved in the running of an award-winning street food event in Stockport called Foodie Friday, which has grown over a number of years to now regularly attract thousands of people. And it attracts not just young people, but a real mix of all ages. It's a great multi-generational event that brings people all from different parts of the town together into the town centre. And I think events like that are absolutely key. And I know for a fact that young people have invested in Stockport, have bought houses in Stockport because they know that the offer, for example, at Foodie Friday is there, and they like it, and they feel like it's a compelling offer that they want in their town centre. We worked with the band Blossoms to put on a Foodie Friday event where we'd launched their second album in a rather interesting and cool way out of an ice cream van. So as you can see from the big queue there, people queued up throughout the day, and young people came to the front, were able to swap the ticket that they'd had to purchase for an ice cream and also a copy of their album. And they also got to meet the band and get signed autographs, that type of thing. And it was a really great collaborative exercise between a chart-topping band and a local street food event, and succeeded in bringing thousands of people to the marketplace, and especially attracting that generation of young people as well. Arts and music festivals are really important. So this is another example of a folk festival that was run in Stockport, where we had, for example, Circus House, young performers coming and providing the entertainment. We also worked with local schools and colleges to provide the entertainment as well. So this, for example, is the local primary schools who were involved in the St. George's Day celebrations. As you can see from the picture there was the dragon, but we also had children being involved in the maypole celebrations. And again, I think involving children, quite actively in the delivery of performance, it's great for them. It's great for their own experience and developing skills. And it's a fantastic way to bring the community together and attract families to your town centre. What other aspects potentially are important to the future high street when we think of young people? Opportunities for maker space. So, places where young people can, learn new skills and be able to try and handle new technologies. 3D printing are going to be really important. But then physical activity. So, if you've got an alleyway that's doing nothing, put in a basketball court there. Or if you've got a wall that's not doing anything, how about an outdoor climbing wall? Or a car park? Why don't you think about turning it into a skate park and really animating it? And there's a case study that I'd like to highlight here that I think has brought all of those different aspects together. And that's the Wigan Youth Zone. And that's a purpose-built, state-of-the-art youth facility in Wigan, which opened back in June 2013. And it gives young people the opportunity to meet friends, have those new experiences, learn skills, and access the support they need to develop and achieve their potential. And it's got everything, it's got floodlit football pitches, an art room, music room, a skate park, as you can see from the picture at the bottom, and a climbing wall. And so it really gives young people that sense of being able to get involved with something that they perhaps wouldn't otherwise be able to do so, bringing people, young people all from different parts of your community together to learn new skills, for example, this street dance workshop that's going on here. So, really think about how you can deliver that activity to try and support and give young people something to take part in when they're not in school. I think it's a really important part of how we get young people involved in our high streets and town centres. So ultimately, at the beginning, we talked about, young people killing the high street. I actually think young people could be the saviours of the high street. And I've been working to support young people for a number of years through the delivery of the teenage market. And so we've delivered now over 300 teenage market events in over 40 locations across the country. And it's all about supporting young people, giving them that platform to sell their creative products and to build their business. And for the most part, we do see young girls especially that value the opportunity, whether that's, for example, developing a hobby and taking that into a business, which is fantastic. And we've seen a number of young people then go on to further that and start their business and grow it. But we've also seen young people who perhaps have had an online business and have used the teenage market as a platform to meet a physical audience and customer base. And the skills that you develop through that are really unique. Young people get a lot of stick for not really necessarily having the skills to from an employer's point of view to pick up a phone or have those kind of like soft skills that are so required in the workplace. But the teenage market does provide that opportunity in order to be able to develop them. As well as retail, performance is a really important part of many teenage markets. So going back to the arts and the festivals and the involvement of young people there, our teenage market events, we use them as a platform for young people to perform. Really, we use town centres as their stage. And like I say, it's a really fantastically transformative experience for any young people, young person that's involved in a performance as part of a teenage market event. They really get a lot out of it, and they get to see the young traders as well. And we've seen many young performers who've come and then gone on to become young teenage market traders because they've been inspired to do so. And when we surveyed our teenage market traders, what we found was that an overwhelming majority of them felt like taking part in teenage market events has had a positive impact on their life. And we've also seen that, again, an overwhelming majority felt like that taking part in the teenage market has improved their social skills, as well as also improving their business skills as well. So the key, I think, message to take from this is, how can you bring the color, the life, the energy, the diversity, imagination, and creativity of young people to your town? Because they are there. You've just got to find the opportunities in order to engage them. And so if you leave this online learning session having thought about that in a little bit more detail, that would be a really great first step to take. And so we talked about young people growing up in lockdown. Research recently found that 89% of young people have never been asked their opinion about the future of their neighborhood. So if you even start by talking to young people in your communities, you will be a lot further on than most communities, unfortunately, are. Only 8% have taken part in a public consultation. And it was despite the fact that 97% have responded positively to the idea of contributing to these discussions. So young people want to engage, they want to be heard, but you have to engage them. You have to go out there and listen to them. And just as a word of warning, for those that had engaged, those young people that did engage, 46% said that they didn't feel listened to. So it's no good just to kind of say, we'll listen to young people, we'll do a consultation exercise. It can't be tokenistic. It has to be engaged. You have to find a way for it to be a productive and a positive experience for them, where young people do feel like their views and their opinions are actually being listened to. And as you can see from this ladder of participation on your right, the very bottom, we have manipulation. That's where adults use young people to support their own projects, their own agendas. And at the very top, which is where we want to be, is where young people are using their own initiative to make decisions in partnership with adults. A really good place to start potentially is the Voice Opportunity Power Toolkit. This is available on the High Street Task Force Resource Library. And what it does is that it provides 5 sessions upon which you can engage young people in your communities and effectively allow them to tell you what they want to see. But it provides a framework that is really useful to you. So I'd recommend that as a starting point for anybody that's interested in engaging young people in your locality. There's also a report that was done by Commonplace, which is an engagement platform for neighborhoods. And it looked at over 1,000 comments from people under the age of 35 on their platform. And it showed effectively that the stereotypes of the fact that young people are apathetic, they don't care, they're disinterested, are simply not true. Young people recognize the social and economic value that the right mix of shops brings to a vibrant high street. They value the quality of life that a great neighborhood can offer, and they have strong views, but they're open to conversation. They want to find positive solutions, and so will work with you in order to achieve that. And Commonplace proposed 5 simple recommendations to better engage young people more effectively. I'll just end by taking you through these. So number 1, don't assume that young people are disinterested. The evidence shows the exact opposite. Number 2, clearly explain how your proposals will impact on their quality of life. Number 3, ask for their views early on in a project and maintain discussion with them throughout. Number 4, bring some of them into your project, so give them that sense of ownership and belonging. And number 5, think carefully about how you reach and engage with them, because you'll more than likely need to include digital tools as part of that. So that gives you a real simple, kind of 5 recommendations that, if you're starting on this path, bear all of these 5 things in mind. So you can access all of the resources that I've talked about today at the High Streets Task Force Resource Library. It's a fantastic place to go to, because it has a number of case studies, reports, evidence, best practice, research, which can support your high streets transformation. Not just about young people, there's a whole host of different themes. Highly recommend that you visit the Task Force Resource Library and check it out. And if you want to contact me, my email is joe@theteenagemarket.co.uk. My Twitter is @JoeJamesBarrett. And you can find more about the Teenage Market at our website, theteenagemarket.co.uk. And the High Streets Task Force, you visit that by going to highstreetstaskforce.org.uk. They're on Twitter @High Streets Task Force and LinkedIn. So I hope you enjoyed this online learning session. Hopefully it's filled you with some ideas and inspiration for better engaging with young people in your high streets and town centres in the future. And if as a result of this, you do end up working on a project, I'd love to hear from you. So please do get in touch. Thank you.